Recently, the 8th edition of Warhammer 40,000 was released, and whilst we're sure there's plenty of videos with opinions about how it has either saved or ruined the game, we thought that instead, we'd take a look back through the mists of time to 987.m2, or 1987 if you don't want to play along, and the very first edition of 40k known as Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader.
Written by Rick Priestley, this first edition of the game was very different from the game we know today. In many ways it shared more in common with RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, even going as far as to have an extra player as a games master or GM to oversee the game. And it got even more interesting in the lore department. You see, Rogue Trader's lore was a bit all over the place. There's plenty of it that's still canon even now, 30 years later, but there's also stuff in there that was jettisoned out of an airlock at the first available opportunity.
So, with all that in mind, here's 10 weird and wonderful things from Rogue Trader, in no particular order.
Time to switch me shooter from tickle to slap!
Probably the first thing you'll notice when you peruse a Rogue Trader rulebook is how the artwork is both amazingly 80s and, shall we say, erratic in quality. If you're used to the very refined look of modern 40k, then seeing a squat with Slam Sector on his space surfboard, or an assault marine who desperately needs to take a piss, well, it can be a little jarring.
Honestly, these books are worth reading for the artwork alone. Looking through a modern book, it's just very obvious it's a product of a large professional company, whereas this stuff is just so raw and unpolished, it comes across as, I don't know, less corporate and more honest, or something. It's kind of endearing.
It also leads to some pretty wildly different interpretations of things, especially in how they draw Space Marine armor. Sometimes they have backpacks, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're barehanded, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're skinny, sometimes they're walking piles of beef. Although one of the more adorable things is how they often have words like hate or kill written on their armor. And speaking of Space Marines...
Vigilance, brothers. Always vigilance.
In the original Rogue Trader rulebook, they established 12 Space Marine chapters, although the book tells you that it's only 11 for some reason. Maybe it's a test by the Inquisition to see if you notice. But anyway, the chapters might not necessarily be the ones you'd expect. They are as follows: the Blood Angels, the Blood Drinkers, the Crimson Fists, the Dark Angels, the Flesh Eaters, the Flesh Tearers, the Iron Hands, the Rainbow Warriors, Kylie Minogue, the Space Wolves, the Ultramarines, and the White Scars.
Some of these would go on to be pretty important in the setting, and some would end up in relative obscurity, so it's kind of fun to see the Ultramarines, the literal poster child of 40k, displayed on equal footing with the Rainbow Warriors, who've only been mentioned in passing a few times in the 3 decades since their creation.
Ah, the Rainbow Warriors. Not only were the poor bastards probably named after a boat that was sunk, but they get even less love from GW than the sisters do.
This quiet offends Slanesh!
Human mutation is a common theme in 40k, and Rogue Trader was no exception. In fact, there's a huge chart with nearly 100 different mutations should you wish to create a mutant. So, rather than just describe the rules, let's go ahead and make ourselves a mutant. The rules state that to make a mutant, you start with a basic creature, so let's start with a basic human. We'll call him Dennis. Normally, you'd roll a d3 to see how many mutations they'd get, but we're going to cheat a bit here and say we rolled a 3 so the guy has the maximum number of mutations possible. After that, we just need to roll a d100 to see what each one is.
First we roll a 53, which is long legs. The creature has enormously long legs. This is quite advantageous in some situations, allowing the creature to traverse difficult and very difficult ground with only half of the normal penalty. Next we get 63, which is multiple arms. The creature is blessed with multiple arms. These enable additional close combat weapons to be carried and hence additional attacks. And it seems we have to roll again to see how many arms we get, and we roll a 5, which means 4 extra arms. I guess you could say that would come in handy.
No.
On the final roll we get 21, which is crystalline body. The creature's body appears to be made from a form of living glass. It is tough but inflexible. Basically, he's tougher but his armor is weaker. So, there we go. A few rolls later and our perfectly normal human is now Dennis, the long-legged crystal man-spider. It's pretty cool.
Interestingly, although the mutations we got here all affected the character mechanically, many in the list don't and are solely there for roleplay purposes, like your mutant having bird feet, a mutation that confers no advantage or disadvantage but is unattractive, a statement that's just plain offensive to birds, or silly walk, which we assume is only there so that they could A, make a Monty Python reference, and B, use the term perambulatory technique.
Last one to fight is a runty squig!
For the next one, we leave the main rulebook behind and go on to one of the other sourcebooks from the era. The Orcs. This book establishes a lot of stuff about the orcs, quite a lot of which is still canon, but one of the best parts are all the different squigs mentioned. Squigs, short for Squiggly Beasts, are creatures that exist within the orcs' ecosystem that are used for food, kept as pets, used as hair, and often as adorable explosive delivery methods. Oh, look at this little squiggly beast with his squiggly feet. Okay, that's a fuck. Oh my god!
In this book, there's squigs used to freshen breath, squigs used as bagpipes, and squigs used as paintbrushes. Thankfully, to our knowledge, none of the squigs from this book have been explicitly removed from canon, so there's one particular variant described that needs to come back. The Mimic.
This squig has a beak-like mouth and is vaguely parrot-like in appearance. Mimics can be seen perched on the shoulders of many an old and haggard orc, casting expletives and insults at passers-by.
So, you know those YouTube videos of the swearing parrots? That, basically, but with orcish swears, like Zog or something.
Scatter like wind and leaves.
I assume we're all familiar with a certain Marnius Calgar, the large-fisted chapter daddy of the Ultramarines. But what no one talks about is that back in the late 80s, he had a writing desk made out of a dinosaur. That's right, humble viewer. He had a writing desk made out of a dinosaur. They don't even say anything about it. We don't even know if it's stuffed, really well trained, or if this other one is just kept as a spare. The fact that Games Workshop does not talk more about this is a real crime that they should go to an actual jail for. That's it for number 5. I just wanted to talk about the dinosaurs.
Cast your eyes upon me and despair.
It can be pretty interesting to look through the model catalogues from the Rogue Trader era, not only because of nostalgia or because the models, just like the art, are kinda wonky and adorable, but seeing the old price lists are pretty interesting in their own right. For example, in 2017 a 10-man tactical squad will cost around £25, but back in 1988 it only cost £10 for a 30-man squad, although I think it's safe to say that the 2017 models are significantly better quality than the old beakies. However, probably the best thing about the old models is that many of them have names, so as well as the memorable 40k character Marine Advancing, there was Brother Angst, Goreflem Rotbreath, and Sergeant Gutrush. But the absolute best ones have to be the mercenary models, who had names that are quite frankly sublime, like Plundering Pete, No Face Fargo, Sarge Rockhard, Iron Bonce the Squat, and my personal favourite, Mad Morris, who seems to have been born without a neck.
And on the subject of models, they made a model of that Calgar picture from earlier, but they didn't include the dinosaurs because GW's crimes know no bounds.
We are chaos incarnate!
Due to Rogue Trader's more RPG-like gameplay, there's an assortment of statted creatures that aren't part of any particular army. They're just sort of there to add flavour to the game. Some are mundane like horses or cats, Grinxes. Some are things that are still around in 40k like Gene Stealers, since at this point they weren't connected to Tyranids and were their own thing. But some of the creatures in the bestiary are pretty wild.
Like astral hounds that are teleporting psycho-hunting ghost dogs, enslavers that are Lovecraftian horrors that frankly I don't want to think about, dinosaurs, just dinosaurs, and actual literal vampires. Well okay, they're not literal vampires, they're a shape-shifting bat creature who consume life force and turn people into zombies, because of course there's rules for zombies.
There's also stats for alien plant life too, so if you've ever wondered who would win in a fight between a lithe and nimble Eldar warrior and a spiky bush, well, Rogue Trader has got you covered.
Heh, more tingly!
One interesting thing to see is how over the years between Rogue Trader's release and 40k 2nd edition coming out, things started to change. Whilst the rule set was the same, the lore we recognise was slowly coalescing through the various source books. For example, Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, known to us now as a towering space Viking demigod, was originally shown in the main Rogue Trader rulebook like this. Yeah, he's a fucking nerd. In this version, he's just a dude who founded the Space Wolves and got his lungs all screwed up.
However, by the time of the 1991 White Dwarf compilation, Russ was pretty much what he is now. The whole backstory of the Primarchs being scattered across the galaxy, the Great Crusade, even the Heresy, even his design is much more in line with how we see modern Space Wolves, even if this version does look a little more like Ragnar Blackmane than Russ. There are some differences to the current lore, like the Primarchs don't seem to be ludicrous giants in this version, but it's mostly there.
Oh, and they made a model of this version too. It is so adorably tiny for a Primarch. Other examples of changes across the edition include Post-Heresy Dark Angels going from black to green, Space Marines going from exclusively being portrayed in Mark 6 armor to predominantly being shown in Mark 7, a trend that continues to this day. For regular Marines anyway, not Primaris or Grey Knights or whatever, so don't fucking start with me. And the models going from, what am I looking at, to, oh, that is what I'm looking at.
Do not waste what the Emperor provides.
Many of you will have seen this coming when you saw the title of this video, and it'd be a shame not to mention him, so here we go. Inquisitor Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau. If there's anything that illustrates how little Rogue Trader took itself seriously, it's this oddly named gent. In the section introducing the concept of Inquisitors in the main rulebook, he's the example they give, meaning he's the very first Inquisitor ever introduced into 40k. He's described as
a tireless exposer of psychic misdeeds and genetic deviance.
Apart from that description, this picture, and a surprisingly long list of equipment he's got stashed away in that jacket of his, we don't really know anything about the guy. For some reason, the powers that be don't talk about him anymore. We are left to wonder about the great deeds this man has performed for the Imperium of Man, nay, the galaxy. Maybe his skill at inquisitorial subterfuge is such that his feats remain hidden by design. A warrior who wants not fame, only the satisfaction that comes from the destruction of the enemies of man. But we will always remember him, and his very silly name. Inquisitor Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau.
We shall be remembered in the Book of Honor.
And finally, there are a lot of thematic links between Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy, now known as Warhammer Age of Sigma. Apart from the obvious one of both being made by the same company, both have the ruinous forces of chaos, both have orcs, and both have an emperor worshipped like a god. Also, the whole possibly taking place in the same universe but probably not theory.
But the connection was deeper than that in Rogue Trader. At the time, during Fantasy's 3rd edition, the mechanics of the two games were pretty much the same, so units, rules, and equipment from one game could be used in the other, and this is explicitly stated in the rulebook. So apart from making interesting death matches possible, like who would win between the Crimson Fists and the Skaven, I guess it would be totally possible to do things like play a fantasy game where the lizard men find a plasma cannon, or have a Genestealer cult but with centaurs.
And this is really just scratching the surface of what you can do. We implore you to check out both rulebooks and see what stuff you can concoct. And let us know in the comments if you do, we want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. But seriously, the sheer ridiculous freedom to create weird shit by mixing these books is amazing. Want to write a campaign where the Space Wolves go on to fight a suspected demon incursion but find out it's actually an army of ill-tempered gnomes? You can totally do that.
And I guess that's the big difference between Rogue Trader and modern 40k. These days it's a war game. It's got rule sets that are designed in such a way it can be played competitively without the need for a GM. The lore is, although often tweaked, long established, and there's a constant grimdark tone to it. Despite issues with the odd thing here or there, it's all relatively polished, consistent, and professional.
Rogue Trader, on the other hand, was just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. It was about creating fun stories with a rule set that, being relatively convoluted, allowed for huge amounts of customization. It didn't matter if it was fair, because you had a GM to iron out those kinks, and anyway, who cares, you just rolled up a mutant who has an attractive fucking bird feet. And that's not to say that modern 40k is boring or anything, we wouldn't be making this video if we didn't love what the 40k setting became, just that the first edition of it, with all its rough edges and oddities, was something uniquely charming.
Hey there, thanks for watching! Very special thanks to Remlays from 40k Theories for lending us some of his mouth words for this video. Also, a massive thanks to the following people who support us on Patreon: Alex Kassun, Battle Barge Lobsters, Billy, Kiva Brennan, Cullen, Dennis Davison Jr., Dr. Xanatos, Jab725, Longfang, Mass Observer, Matthew, Matthew Lynn, Maximum, Mega Slippers, Auto Xenos Agent, Pin Barlow, Riser DR, Sexual Yeti, Smirky, Simon Turnbull, Slow Elk, Soul of Lemon, Uneven Frostgun, and Unfailing Eagle. So I've been thinking, like, how would you keep a dinosaur still enough in order for you to just write, I don't know, a shopping list on its fucking forehead? I mean, it's gotta be either, like, your best friend in the universe and also have the patience of a living saint, or, like, I don't know, I want to believe that the dinosaur is alive just because that makes me happy. But At the same time, I believe that a stuffed dinosaur would make way more sense. I don't know, I am trying to work out the logistics of this. If anyone can help me out here, or has any other theories, I would be very happy in hearing them.